You, Dr. Shambaugh, if you're confirmed, you are going to be involved in the debate about global taxation. And I recently released an analysis of my current investigation into how major pharmaceutical companies are using tax havens to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. Our report showed that AbbVie had 75% of its sales in the United States, but 99% of its profits were reported offshore, much of it in tax havens like Bermuda. The report also found that since 2017, AbbVie has been able to exploit subsidiaries and offshore tax havens to avoid paying billions of dollars in taxes on prescription drug sales. So let's picture it this morning. You have got, Americans waiting in line to get their prescriptions filled, wondering how they're going to be able to afford their medicines and still pay the rent and buy groceries. And then we see these big pharmaceutical giants. And by the way, we're concerned about Merck and Abbott as well because they've been stonewalling our questions. So we've got these big pharmaceutical, giants finding ways to make money here in the United States, selling medicines, desperately needed medicines to the senior citizens, and then they go off and book their profits somewhere else. It's, textbook tax evasion. Now, you're not at the Treasury Department now, but what is your understanding of how reforming our international tax system in line with a global minimum tax would address this type of tax avoidance?
Well, Senator, I think, first of all, by having a global minimum tax from the United States, what it would mean is income that is booked outside the United States would still be facing some sort of tax. It can right now under the 2017 law, but as your investigation suggests, it's still something that firms can avoid. The global minimum tax that's been negotiated, my understanding is, would also raise that rate somewhat from the 2017 law, which would bring it a little closer to the U.S. statutory rate, which would basically give firms less of an incentive to book profits elsewhere. I think a really crucial part of it, though, my understanding of it is because it is negotiated with over 100 countries, it means that other countries would also have a global minimum tax set up so that U.S. firms wouldn't face a disadvantage because the U.S. taxes foreign profits because other countries would be doing so as well. So it I think in that sense would try to harmonize policies across the world and have less of a race to the bottom set up, and frankly, really less of an incentive to use tax havens.
Well, I thank you, and that's a thoughtful answer, and I'm not surprised because you've worked on these global economic issues for some time. People always say, oh, this stuff is really complicated, hard to sort out. Not so complicated when you think, Senator Bennett, about senior citizens standing in line in Colorado, trying to figure out how they're going to afford their medicine, and then we read about these companies that make their profits in the United States hunting and pecking for tax havens around the country to avoid paying their fair share. So I thank you for your thoughtful answer. Dr. Haffajee, thank you as well for being here and for the professionalism that you have brought to this whole health issue for years in the past. I want to ask you about the accelerated FDA approval issue and put it in the context of Alzheimer's, because we all desperately want cures for Alzheimer's. My mother, who got a master's degree from Yale in the days when no woman got a master's degree, was dealing with Alzheimer's for well over a decade. So we desperately want a cure. So we recently went through the accelerated approval process with respect to a new Alzheimer's drug, and I want to walk you through what happened. The company comes in, we've got what amounts to a real breakthrough, a cure. So what's the government going to do? The government is going to jack up Part B premiums on seniors in order to cover this. Well, it's still questionable what the evidence is. So when Dr. Califf was nominated to head the FDA, I asked him in considerable detail about whether we ought to have a fresh policy. I want to support accelerated approvals for desperately needed medicine, but I also want the next step to be those critical trials to make sure we get to the bottom of the evidence. Do you agree with Dr. Califf? And what might you do in your position at ASPE, the HHS department, to promote that philosophy, because I feel very strongly about it. Accelerated approvals can really give us the opportunity to make breakthroughs. But we also got to have the next step, which are these critical trials. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Senator Wyden, for the question, and this is an important one. First off, I do agree with Dr. Califf's position that we need to make sure that when we have drugs approved through this accelerated pathway, that we do the confirmatory studies and confirm the clinical benefits. And I would, were I to be confirmed, I would support you and Dr. Califf in making sure that that happens.
Very good. Senator Crapo.